Welcome to the Living with FASD, Candid Conversations with Patti Kasper podcast on your favorite podcast platform. And this week is part 2 of my candid conversation with Carl Jung and Joel Sheagren. We're going to pick back up where we left off last week in discussing their upcoming book launch of Embracing Hope. A book about FASD from the perspective of two dads. So buckle up, hang on, and let's get going with this candid conversation.
And the mind map is a useful tool for that because it allows you to backtrace what happened. You can break down an event or a series of events and understand a little better about how it got to where it did. So it's a useful tool when it's used properly, but we don't go a lot into how to do it, but we do talk about it. So.
Okay.
What we do is if you're not, so my son used a software for that.
Yeah.
And as abstract as it looks, it's actually fairly linear because you're connecting that what a good friend looks like as an example.
Right.
So friendship, and then draw the lines. They're supportive. They would tell the truth. And so those are fairly linear. And our kids are also really good at, and I think we explained this in chapter 5 as well, where the build program is they're really good at visuals, right? So visual expression versus abstract reasoning.
Right.
And so in the case of my son, he was able to punch out these 3 extraordinary mind maps. And you can do it like Carl's saying, you can put it on a whiteboard, graphic paper, you can do post-it notes and put strings between it, whatever works to get the information down. And then the build program, I would turn over what I was writing to our son's social worker, and they would go off and they would come back with input for that. So that's how that all developed. But the idea behind, he's super smart. He's north of 110 on his IQ, but his adaptive skill is 1%. And that's what we need for every day. And so that's where that program or that, became, how do we try to help him to get from point A to point B with friendships? And he's my thumbs up. He's dumped those friends because he understood that they were getting him in trouble.
Yeah, and that was the significant thing when the day Joel told me that Sam had created those mind maps and then showed them to me. That was significant because I don't know that I could have done that level of mind mapping when I was Sam's age. So,
well, I think too, that just goes to show you how everybody's mind works in a different way.
Right.
I mentioned to you guys before we got on air that my one brother and I think the last time we had IQ tests in high school, we both tested at 135. But our minds are wired in completely different ways. Like we're not even part of the same species. And, which is, so we appreciate each other and don't understand each other at the same time. It's like, why would he think that? Why would she think that? It's kind of, it's incomprehensible. But IQ deals with what is our capacity to learn and retain facts and perform based on those facts on a paper test versus adaptive functioning. And that's all navigating life. Facts don't matter so much with navigating life.
Right. And well, then if you couple that with other things, impulse control, confabulation, cause and effect, and these are all chapter titles because they're all also symptoms.
Yeah.
One thing will lead to another. With my son Mark, I wonder how many things he's been convicted of
Mhm.
that he admitted to that he didn't actually do.
Sort of like the school story, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
And
Yeah.
and that was, Zach in embracing Zach in the novel, that was very well presented in terms of, you did this, here, sign this paper.
Mhm.
And Zach signs the paper without understanding what he just attested to.
Mhm.
And that's an actual interview with a mom
Mhm.
and the school story in that context. So it can be really scary in that regard. So it's so we decided to add chapter 5, which is the adaptive skills, as our first core conversation chapter.
Mhm.
It's set up really similar, but our chapters, to go back, I don't know that I finished. We have 10 components,
Mhm.
and we have an anecdotal story to help, and we use one of the fictional characters, and we call that part A.
Mhm.
And then we define what, say, self-control is, and then as one of the core chapters. And then we note something of
Mhm.
significance, like what is this in the general population, or how does this impact somebody? And then we put the symptoms, and that's another area we trim down to 3, and the 50 or 30 or whatever they're on the website.
Yeah.
And I'd made it to chapter 15. I was like, we need to cut out the brain regions and the symptoms so that readers will read this. And so there's 3, and then we have a chart that kind of highlights others, but the full, what we understand are more comprehensive symptoms would be on the website.
Mhm.
And then we get into the interventions. And we try to, in chapter 5, we just have one, and it's set up just a little bit different. We weave stories into it. And then we have at least one intervention in the core chapter and up to 4.
Mhm. Mhm.
Well, and that's why I mentioned going from 1,000 pages to 500 is because we cut out, we said we need to set a limit here under each, behavior intervention, symptom intervention, and minimize this because nobody's going to want to read a scientific book. No parent is going to have, they're going to look at it and say, I can't process this and put it back on the shelf. And it doesn't help anybody if that happens. So, and we've had people from around the world review individual chapters.
Mhm.
And you get comments like, oh, this sounds like my brother, or this sounds like my dad, or my sister, or my mom, or the neighbor guy down the street, or, we had a lot of those. But we also had a couple of different people say, this could be taught at the college level.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah. And so then what we do is we finish that part A of the story
Mhm.
based on one of the interventions so
Mhm.
that parents have an idea of how an adult worked with
Yeah.
um,
I could
that
easily
intervention.
see Embracing Hope becoming a college text.
Well, we've had a number of researchers tell us that, right? So that's maybe.
Yeah.
In the context, let's get this book out first.
Yeah.
Well,
And then
I'm just saying, I mean, really, if someone is going to create a course, like I would love to be able to do at some point to teach at our local university. I I would assume it's up to me to pick and choose what textbooks I want to use,
No, not always.
and to use it and to
yeah,
be in
well,
control of it.
we've outlined some things for a pediatrician, but we could very easily do that for
Yeah,
college, teaching
yeah,
college.
Yeah.
yeah.
That's in the works, and we're thinking about it. But to finish the 10 areas would be, then we've got the interventions, right? And then we finish part A
Mhm.
or with story B of how a parent works with that.
Yeah.
And then we tell a personal story. And then we put in a little high key,
Yeah.
like,
Haiku.
so that's technically our 10th,
Yeah.
where let's take a break And then the last two sections are the brain regions and the brain domains. And so those are the 10 components. And they're self-contained within 20 pages-ish for each chapter. So a parent can go through it. And if you're having trouble with impulse control, it would give you, oh, these are some symptoms. Oh, this is some potential interventions. And then we started keeping track of what interventions we were using because we're trying to do them based primarily on metacognition, which is to think about your thinking.
Yeah.
Because that's what's been helping my son in some of his success that he's having. And metacognition is something parents can do at home, like the board game. Chapter 12, we have a board game. And here's a set of 4 colors and a set of questions so that it helps your teen think your way through what the outcomes might be in a game form, right? And so it's primarily based on metacognition. There's a little bit of CBT, which in and of itself does not work, but it's easy for the therapist to code. It needs to be heavily modified, and you need to be very, very skilled at how to modify it. But part of that is visuals and timers. That's part of the CBC. So we do use some of those kind of components, but in the context of trying to help the team think their way through what's going on with them. So those are the elements within the core conversations. And we have 15 of them. And chapter 5 and chapter 19 are just set up just a slightly different, and 19 is on sleep and nutrition and exercise. And so those aren't story-based. And those are heavy with I think we have over 70, maybe over 80 interventions in this book. And we advocate in that chapter, you might want to work with professionals for the sleep, for the nutrition, etc. But those are by that chapter by far, that doesn't have 1 or 2, that has maybe 20, but they're paragraphs.
Speaking of sleep, that dovetails nicely into another comment I really wanted to highlight because I so appreciated it. To make this, and this is a quote, to make this plain, intoxication in an adult affects sleep, memory, mood, judgment, and coordination. And so all of us, in hearing that, we can imagine watching a drunkard stumble from the bar to their car, right? So why would we expect, getting back to the quote, so why would we expect a developing fetus exposed to alcohol to emerge untouched by similar disruptions? In other words, imagine the alcohol is gone, but the effects remain embedded in a child's neural wiring from the start. And one of the things that I learned in putting out the second edition of Sip by Sip, I redove into the pool of research and stumbled across the reality that blood remains, or alcohol remains, in the umbilical cord tissues for 20 weeks. That's 4 months, because there's no ability within those tissues to metabolize the alcohol. And so that means, if there's alcohol exposure during the pregnancy, it could be 4 months before that drink clears the baby's system.
It's just remarkable in that. And I think we added to that in our last edit. Imagine the intoxication is gone, right? We have something in that regard, but it's
and you still have the hangover.
well, yeah, and it's one of those one of those things, there's two things that I've had early on, being a simpleton, if you will, in trying to explain things. I'm abstract and I go over my own head all the time with trying to explain the linear process. In reality, I've got to dub it down so that it's simple to understand. And I was trying to understand in simple terms the impact that had been on our son
Yeah.
after his diagnosis 8 years ago. And so I've had that phrase, that kind of understanding for a long time.
Mhm.
And Carl and I just worked at trying to get that in a way that would make sense, right?
Yeah.
But the other is you get a little pushback on the alcohol, and I've had it with medical doctors, but there's no research about the specifics, right?
Mhm.
And it's like, well, that's wrong because
Mhm.
any amount of alcohol at any time. And what they're trying to point to is you can't tell me that on the fourth month affects the amygdala and that the alcohol affects the amygdala or facial or whatever it might be. And so the way I used to be a canoe guide in the Boundary Waters, and I framed it around, well, does wind in a storm, is it a fact that wind in a storm affects trees?
Mhm.
Do you know if it's going to blow a branch down? It's going to blow the tree down? Does it impact them all in the same way? And so that's another phrase that I
Yeah,
think might be in the book in that
I
regard. But
love that.
yeah, so it was in counter to some smart aleck doctors that I was speaking to about this.
Mhm.
It doesn't affect me, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, and that sort of shut them up.
I'll bet it did.
Well, an argument that I use with some people that disregard the alcohol effect is, for 4 or 5 hours after mom stops consuming alcohol, that amniotic sac acts like an open bar for the baby. And you can't tell me that's not having an impact on the brain.
Why didn't we have that in the book? It's got to make
So
its way to the website, Carl.
it will. Yeah, there's so much
That's
on the
I,
that's really excellent. Yeah.
and it's true. I mean, and it's a fact.
well,
Yeah,
either it is in the book or it came up in a private conversation I had with Carl recently,
yeah,
because I know I've heard that not
yeah.
too long ago.
It's the amniotic sac doesn't hold a couple of gallons of fluid,
Right.
but the alcohol content of the sac
Yeah.
impacts the baby long after mom stops drinking.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and
And
I don't share that to stigmatize mom. It's the reality,
exactly.
you know. And in most of the cases that I've worked in supporting families, mom didn't know she was pregnant.
Yeah.
So
And
can't fault.
even and we
Yeah,
really can't judge at all, period, as I've said with other guests, because if mom did know, what none of us are privy to is what was going on in her life that made
right.
her capable versus incapable of doing anything about the knowledge.
Right. Well, and I look at when my mom was expecting me and the chaos in her life at that time that I know about, not the stuff I don't know about, but the chaos I know about. And I'm shocked she didn't drink more. So, you
Yeah.
know, that's just the reality.
Yeah.
We don't live in other people's lives. We can't expect to anticipate what they're going through.
Right. Right.
Yeah, and the autism world has done a remarkable job of both understanding the prevalence, or I'm sorry, the awareness,
Yeah,
Mhm.
and addressing the stigma.
right.
Yeah.
And so our intent is really to address the stigma because we really need to know how to support folks
Mhm.
and not cast judgment because we don't know what the story is.
Right. Right.
And
If a mom has been addicted to alcohol, most rehab centers will not take pregnant women
Right.
because they don't want the liability.
Right.
So they will turn those women away who need the help. So that's one possible situation. Or if mom has been traumatized, like Kennedy, if mom's been traumatized, there may be just a complete brick wall between her and the fetus within. So it may not be registering. You know, how many times have you guys, you know, looked at something and you recognize it, but the impact of that, it's like, oh, you know, was delayed.
Oh, we've experienced that quite a bit.
Yeah,
When you say
it,
don't.
right.
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, that happens
Sure.
to all of us at
Yeah.
one point or another. So, yeah, blaming moms is completely off.
Well, yeah, yeah. We're talking about prenatal alcohol exposure, and part of what we're talking about is the disease side, right?
Right.
Alcoholism is a
Yeah.
disease, and any disease needs support, not judgment.
Yeah.
Correct. We don't
And so,
stigmatize people for having cancer.
yeah, yeah, and you don't know the story that led to that, right? The birth mother for our kids, she has undiagnosed FASD.
Mhm.
And really, really struggles with the adaptive skills, right? But we come alongside her and support her the best we can. We know part of her story, but we also know, and part of that story is we know her mother drank, but we
Mhm.
don't know the story of why her mom drank, or what the grandma may have been in
Or the
this,
great grandma. Right.
etc. And we don't pass FASD on genetically, but
Mhm.
we do generationally because it impacts the impulsivity and the proclivity, if I'm saying that right,
Well,
for
there can be some genetic component. If the baby is a female and alcohol exposure occurs on the day that that female baby's eggs are formed, because women get their eggs before they're
Oh,
born, whereas men's are produced on the fly. Right?
well, and men aren't off the hook. It's a lower impact, but the
Yeah.
impact can be real.
Yeah.
mhm.
It has to be chronic.
Yeah.
Uh,
So there
but
are
it is,
genetic and epigenetic changes. But you're right. It's also the intergenerational is not only that, but it's also because, you
yeah,
know, alcohol tends to go down generations and therefore the effects of it will also.
yeah. And one of the things that we do address is the impact versus the prevalence.
Mhm.
So, and the death of children are not included in the prevalence rate, but it is part of the impact.
Yeah.
And FASD rates have just recently changed to 7.1%.
Which is 1 in 14.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then 1 in 7 women admit to drinking during pregnancy, self-admit. So that's the impact is double. And the other part that we don't talk about, and we do in the book, is the mental health and the physical aspects that alcohol. So it may not be behavioral, it might be, but it doesn't get counted as part of the prevalence because it isn't within the scope of the behavior side.
Yeah. And
So
that's certainly something Carl and I can speak to, right? Because we both have physical impacts of the alcohol exposure. You know, I've said in my book and probably an episode or two that I'm 100% convinced that my type 1 diabetes was caused by the prenatal exposure. Whereas if you look at the research, it's correlational. The two tend to go together, but we don't know what came first, the cart or the horse. But recent research, and again, I came upon this in prepping for the second edition of Sip by Sip. The 5 systems involved in insulin signaling and production come on board in that first month. based on the age I was at diagnosis, that my mom had already recognized I couldn't process sugars well before I was finally taken to the pediatrician, which is not on her, it's on him refusing to give her an appointment. He thought she's a worrywart.
Mhm.
Thank goodness she was persistent. I'm fully convinced, and I know she drank every day during her pregnancy because she told me she did. So yeah, I think it is causal for me. Um, there's so many other things. I'm going to end up getting my back rebuilt hopefully in the next couple months. And yeah, I kind of think that might have something to do with it because I'm a little young yet for that much damage. So
So there's Carl and I, and everyone understands there's 428. There was some research
mhm,
on the meta-analysis. Carl and I, in our research, as we were poking around, I think that there are more, maybe,
A lot
maybe,
more. Yeah.
yeah, and we still have to sort all that out. It didn't become a priority for the book piece, but it will be
yeah,
eventually on the website. But
yeah.
you think about, like, our daughter has been impacted, but she doesn't have behavioral pieces. And for Father's Day, she took me out to dinner and she goes, Dad, I think I need to get an FASD diagnosis. And I said, and so we talked a little bit, and I said, well, your brother was diagnosed 8 years ago, and about 5 years ago, I started recognizing that maybe some of the things that you're dealing with are probably from the alcohol as well. She has some clinical anxiety and she has struggled with depression along the way. She has those pretty much under control, but she had issues around the eyes, her eyes vibrating. When you
Mhm,
think about alcohol, right? Intoxication, and you have trouble with seeing, and your speech slows down. So does your thinking. And she has trouble with processing speed. And so we talked a little bit about that. She's studying to be an engineer. She's married young, and she's got a great husband, awesome young man. And uh, they're both in sort of that linear space of IT, and she's studying to be a mechanical engineer. And when she does the pre-testing, she does fantastic.
mhm,
She has struggled with the abstract to cross over to the actual test.
mhm,
And
mhm.
so we talked a little bit about that, it doesn't matter what your diagnosis is, it's the symptoms.
Yeah,
And if you're struggling with slowing down or struggling with the abstract or struggling with this, that's where you want to get help.
yeah.
And so we kept it short and brief in that regards, but sensory issues,
Mhm.
they don't fall into the category of behavior, right?
Mhm. Very
Uh,
much so. But I look at the book and thinking, where was all of this information when my son was a little boy?
Yeah. Yeah, I know. And we've been going on and on. This is going to be 2 episodes, guys.
We're not even through the whole book. So,
Right? I'm not even all the way through chapter 5 with the things I'm pointing out.
back to Joel's point though, there are a lot of places. I think in almost every chapter we say you need to discuss these symptoms with your team, your
Mhm,
professional team, your medical team.
mhm. Yeah,
And we do that with intention. We're not doctors. We're just two dads.
yeah,
At the end of the day, we're just two dads. We
yeah.
care. We understand.
we drink
Uh,
a lot of coffee.
we drink a lot of coffee. But yeah, and it's our sincere hope, and I think we're both getting to a point where we're beginning to believe the possibility that this can help people.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely. And isn't that, I mean, all 3 of us are solidly in that space.
yeah.
Um, one of the things that separates the first and second edition of my work is a call to action chapter at the end. where I'm really encouraging research teams to look at that relationship. Is it correlational or is it causal? Because one of those 428 comorbid conditions is early onset dementia, which is defined as diagnosed prior to age 65. So those who are impacted by FASD have a 206 times greater likelihood of having early onset dementia, but it doesn't specify which dementia, right? Few people realize that there are hundreds of different types of dementia. But I recognize the similarities between FASD and Lewy body. I recognize so many of the hallmark symptoms that we struggle with in the FASD community as things that affect my mom and so many others who I have come to know and love in the Lewy body community, because I'm active in that space as well. And and also to investigate FASD and type 1, because in both, and that's only 2 of the 428. But
Well,
if
Joel and I are both of the mind calls to action are a good thing. And I did
yeah,
that in Seattle, and I think Joel, you did that at the ministry conference in DC, and you're probably going to do that again next week, or is it next week already? No, next week in Florida.
The 16th will be in Florida, and I'm
yeah.
speaking to a Rotary Club. I've been asked to come down, and I'll be fundraising for the feature film down there. And one of the things that I set up our story,
Mhm.
and then I don't need to get into the details, but I pull it back to what is one thing. So the Rotary Club has a series of items that they address, and 3 overlap with what we're doing really closely: fight disease, save women and children, and support education.
Yeah.
And so I highlight those and I say, I'm going to share with you what I started doing 8 years ago, but I want you to take time to write out one thing that you're going to do in the next 2 hours, next 2 days, next 2 weeks, something that you can take action to, because there maybe you want to get educated on this.
Yeah.
And parenting, understanding how to parent different has made a huge difference. So getting educated is huge. And I go through a list of things that they might be able to do. So yes, a call to action. We don't necessarily have that per se
No, but
in our book, but that could be on websites. We could be, and I think that goes back to the number of researchers who have told us you need to turn this into, and they've all come from different perspectives: therapy, medical, etc. So we have taken time in the midst of this to outline what it might look like for pediatrics to be able to take this, because the neuroscience sort of lend themselves to that process, and maybe it's a call to action that could happen then.
Yeah. And I'm just thinking, looking at these 3 conditions, the cost of care for FASD that's unrecognized and supported, the cost of care for type 1 diabetes, the cost of care for Lewy body dementia, all 3 are enormous burdens to society. And if they are causal relationships, which I really suspect they are, then emphasizing, making some traction with prevention is going to have some really enormous consequences for the good with those other conditions as well.
Add to that liver, heart, kidney, eye,
Yeah.
ears.
Because whatever is developing at the time of exposure, solvents dissolve lipids, no matter what cell is protected by that lipid barrier, whether it's the liver, the heart, in my case, the pancreas, whether it's the teeth or the bones, whatever, or the brain, of course, the brain, because that's developing every day. It just is mind boggling. that it's just mind-boggling.
Well, the
FASD is
mind
one
is
of those things. You can't unlearn it, right? You can't unring the bell. Once you know this stuff, it changes you.
no, but it might make a difference in, say, nutrition or figuring out a better, because one of the things alcohol does is it messes with the rhythm of sleep, right?
Yes.
And so being able to figure out some of those components, and that's a probably Carl and I haven't talked about this, but any one of our chapters could be a book in and of
Mhm.
itself, but particularly the sleep, nutrition, and exercise.
Yeah.
And those are ways to combat some of those impacts, but I know Carl struggles with the enamel on the teeth. I don't know how you combat that, but maybe there's a nutrition earlier on that we'll discover.
Hmm.
And those are some of our hopes in that people can take this book and this information and turn it into a call to action and
I would love to
take
see that.
take the baton and run with it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I would
There are,
love to see that.
yeah, there are so many possibilities, you know, but on the radar, there's a lot of possibilities coming up that we're looking at exploring as well. So, you know, training platform for parents and all of those things. So, you know, the project, the embraced movement, if for I think that's what we call it, the which encompasses the embracing Zach, the documentary, the book or the movie, our book Hope, and then the shepherding series that we're working on. There's a significant potential to reach a lot of people and to help a lot of people, and ultimately that's our goal at the end of the day.
Yeah.
How can we help others not have to experience some of the frustrations we experienced as parents?
Well, it has been marvelous having this candid conversation with you guys, and I'm not even halfway through my list of talking points potentially for this conversation, and we've been going at it for, oh gosh, almost 2 hours.
Yes.
So we'll just
Got a lot of editing to do.
Yes.
no,
Cut out all the rabbit
I'll
holes.
just split it into two.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
don't like editing things out. I don't
Yeah.
like short form formal interviews because then people just feel like they've been teased.
Yeah. Well, we're not out to tease anybody.
Yeah,
And, you know,
I like meat on the bones, right?
if they go to the website for our book, embracingHopeBook.com,
Yes.
and they can request to be notified when the book is released.
Yeah.
And when they make that request, they'll get a sample chapter from the book.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
So you will be on Amazon, yes? Any
Yeah.
other platforms? Like I know my book is books.by/ and then my hashtag, right? But are you guys going to be on Books By as well, or Ingram Sparks, or anything else?
Well, Amazon has the ability to distribute to all of those platforms, but we haven't talked beyond Amazon yet.
Really?
Our goal is to get to that point.
Okay.
Yeah, Jody's
I
gonna
didn't
want
know
us to
Amazon was
do
branching out that way.
Yeah. It has an option, and when you publish through Amazon, you can select it to allow for other booksellers to sell through the Amazon chain. Like the independent booksellers can get it through Amazon, and our percentages are lower, but we haven't looked at books.by yet, and I think that's a conversation we'll be having soon. So
Yeah.
So Jody Culp is helping us finish the edits. We had a designer out of Colombia, South America, start the process. She's been doing the design for the Embrace movement since the beginning. And when I was having a conversation with her, and this will lead up to our distribution piece, she wanted to do the design, and I was like, well, I'd like to have you develop the template for it. And she goes, no, I've got to do the whole thing. I want to learn how to do that. And Carl and I don't know enough Spanish to give her direction for some of the nuances in the book.
Yeah.
She did a remarkable job. But I needed the file with all of its components, and she sent that so that Jody could finish it because,
Okay.
for instance, we don't wrap bullet points. If you've got a second line, it should stay flush with the copy, not with the bullet point, right?
Yeah.
And so Jody's been fixing those kinds of things. And Jody is also pretty well versed in the world of publishing.
Mm-hmm.
And she's thinking beyond what Carl and I know.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so
And that's why I had her help me with the second edition rather than the company I used for the first edition, which I would never recommend to anybody.
yeah,
Yeah.
so we'll have to explore all of those
Yeah.
kinds.
Jody's amazing.
Yeah.
She's remarkable. I handed off the first 10 chapters to her this morning,
For the final edits. Yeah.
for the final edits, and she's fighting, excuse me, she's fighting a cold at the moment
Yeah.
and doing 100 other things. But Carl and I are just, let's get through the book. We haven't even figured out the marketing. We
Yeah.
haven't
Yeah.
figured out the next distribution. How about the
Yeah.
online courses for each of the chapters that we'd like to do? How do we
Yeah.
address the conversations or with
Yeah.
the college level, the therapy level for
Yeah.
social workers, et cetera, et cetera. So we have a lot of work ahead of us, and we've
Yeah.
created ourselves.
Yeah.
And
Well, I will plan on having you guys back on sometime if that's all right.
Oh, you definitely.
Okay.
just Carl, not me.
Yeah.
Being
Yeah.
silly that he's
Yeah.
that's really the
Yeah.
this isn't for the
Was,
recording, but in the
yeah,
con
no, I'll cut this out.
so in the context when we were writing the book, I said, Carl, you're going to have your name first on this book
Yeah.
because you're the one who likes to go to conferences and talks.
I don't mind
You're
getting up
always
in
going to pick
300.
the first person in the line first.
Yeah, I don't mind getting up in front of 350 people and speaking for, 10, 12, 15 minutes. That doesn't bother me.
Yeah.
Because here we're not talking about my own personal story all the time. We're talking about many stories,
Mhm.
So I'm all in favor of that. And that's something we have to consider is once this hits the market, people are in and people take notice, they're going to want one or both of us to come to their event and speak.
Mhm.
And they may want to have an online course. And so we're
Mhm.
looking at putting together a 12-week sprint
Mhm.
that repeats itself.
Yeah.
But it could potentially be different information. So if you come in at week 8, you're not going to feel left out.
Right.
Right.
Because it'll repeat itself. It'll come back to wherever that may be in the sequencing but those have yet to be figured out in that context. But
Yeah.
the other thing that we're looking at that's probably earlier than the courses would be the online community. We're wanting people to share what has worked with them.
Mhm.
Yeah, we have 4 profiles, like we've mentioned. So there's really 4 channels.
Yeah.
There's the autistic community, et cetera. And how do you support? Because Carl has 2 children with autism as well. And
Mhm.
so how do you come alongside parents for the specifics of autism? And of course, that's a spectrum as well, right? And
Yeah.
so the same for ADHD, and there's multiple types of ADHD. And that's another area that I think, we know that the statistics are almost 9 out of 10 times kiddos are misdiagnosed.
Mhm.
ADHD is one of those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And our son has dual diagnosis of autism and FASD, right?
So when I had I self-identified with FASD, 5 years ago. I did not self-identify the ADHD at that point. And I still had this concept of hyper little boys in my head, even though I know I should know better, as you know, having a master's in psych. But when I had last summer, when I had my FASD confirmed through assessments, I mentioned that, and she said, well, it's not in my wheelhouse to make that official diagnosis, because it's a medical diagnosis. However, I would say, yeah. And I mentioned this to a friend of mine. She started laughing so hard. I'm like, what's going on? She goes, I've known you had ADHD since the minute I met you 7 years ago. It's like, okay.
Like my wife, when I asked her if she thought I might have FASD, and she said, "Well, that's a no-brainer." You know, yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah,
But in the
And it,
context of dual diagnosis, and like the autism that our son has, and his numbers officially are part of the reason that autism numbers are growing, right? And
yes,
that's pretty common,
yes,
if not all. I think
yeah,
it's Carl and I started some research towards the end there of the dual diagnosis, but our son doesn't have autism. What he has is the symptoms of it because of the prenatal alcohol exposure. And we're thankful for that and very grateful because he gets supports that he wouldn't. His social worker's been with him 8 years, and he wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that diagnosis.
yeah.
And so we're really thankful for it, but he doesn't have it. What he has is the symptoms of it. And it would be nice that we eventually get to a point where we recognize the spectrum.
You know, that this brings up such an important point, because those of us in the FASD space, when we look at the stats about the alcohol use soaring in the response to the COVID lockdowns, you know, alcohol sales went up 40%. And they're really, the only reason they're falling off at this point is because Gen Z is choosing not to drink by and large, thank goodness. Finally, a generation has their head on straight around that. But, you know, those of us in this field, we've been expecting the explosion of neurobehavioral symptoms. We've been expecting it. We've been warning. We've been predicting, and all the attention is going to ASD, and it's going to the FASD. And I find that really sad
well,
and
and I kept
really
telling the,
frustrating.
our team with, because we have the other two with autism at some level, with our son Mark, this isn't autism. Even the one facility he was in their autism unit, and they kept saying, we don't know what this is. That was long before he had the FASD diagnosis, and they said, we don't know what this is, but this isn't autism.
Yeah.
But when he got the FASD diagnosis, the psych team refused to remove the autism diagnosis. We're just going to leave that there. I'm like, well, that's not accurate. Well,
Yeah.
that's the way it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, and our assessment was we've had it done 3 times, and the last 2 were remarkably thorough.
Mm-hmm.
But both of the clinics specialize in autism.
Mm-hmm.
And because of the adaptive skills, the social skills, the rigidity of thinking, he falls into the category of being autistic. And he's anything but, except in those areas. But we are super, super thankful that he's able to. Jody told us when that happened, oh, that's the keys to the kingdom. You'll get supports, so to speak, right? And that's been the case. But it is unfortunate.
And I
A
think
lot of
too, that's
regard.
why a lot of providers will say, I'm just going to give you this label because it'll get you access to services, except with that diagnosis, there's nothing about the 428 comorbid conditions.
Right.
That's part of a person's right to know as their medical history. My medical history includes all those things I am potentially more likely to develop.
Yeah, and I think Carl and I in time will be addressing that. I mean, we've started to with the adaptive skills, putting that extra stuff into the website. We've got the four, I think that's in the same chapter 4. So the way that we've set it up is that go to the resource page and look up chapter 4. If that's the area, if you're in chapter 4 and you want more information, and the 428 comorbidities would fall into chapter 4. And so that's part there, I believe, or will be in that regard, but we'll flush some of that out because those are really important conversations for long-term care, for medical histories, for understanding your health conditions better and where it's coming from. And so we're not medical doctors, we're not researchers, just a couple of passionate dads that are trying to help, right?
Yeah.
Because what we've learned has made a difference in our homes, and so we want to pass that on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And on that note, I am going to have to bid you adieu because I've had my service dog coming into the room. I don't know how many times if you've been able to hear her, but she's like, Mom,
Yeah,
I really need to go outside.
my Max has been that way too. My corgi.
And I really, with a bad back, don't feel like getting on the floor and cleaning up after an accident I could have
Yeah,
prevented.
I get that. Yeah.
So
Anyway, but
we will pick this up another time. I
yeah,
thank you both from the bottom of my heart for making time for this important conversation today.
yeah, I appreciate it very much. And I think, Joel and I are both, I think I can speak for Joel here. I think we're both quite excited about the possibilities of helping people. And that's ultimately, that's our goal. Yeah.
Thank you, Patty, for having us.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you both.
Thanks for your input on the edits.
Yes.
Oh, my pleasure. I am honored.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of Living with FASD Candid Conversations with Patti Kasper. Feel free to send comments, questions, and topics you'd like to learn more about, hear more about, to me at livingwithfasdpodcast@gmail.com. Please remember to like, follow, and share this podcast on whatever platform you use so that more people can find the podcast. Have a blessed week, everyone, and tune in next Monday for another candid conversation on Living with FASD.